Mara D'Souza pressed her palm against a glass door of the apartment lobby, exhaling as the warm air wrapped around her. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, the only sound at this late hour. Her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of another exhausting closing shift at the restaurant. The city outside still pulsed with distant sirens and restless traffic, but inside, the building felt deserted, too still, too hollow for comfort. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake the ache behind her eyes. All she wanted was a shower hot enough to melt her bones and a long sleep beside Rafik. But he'd texted earlier saying he'd be home late, working another overtime shift. She didn't blame him. Their schedules had been tearing at them for months, but tonight that loneliness settled more heavily on her chest. Her footsteps echoed as she crossed the empty lobby toward the elevator. The marble floor reflected her silhouette, small, tired, slightly hunched as though the day had drained her spirit. She tapped the elevator button with a sigh and glanced at the security camera mounted in the corner. It blinked its tiny red light back at her, cold and indifferent. The elevator dinged. Its door slid open with a quiet hiss. Mara stepped inside and leaned against the mirrored wall. Her eyes drifted shut for a moment. She didn't notice the figure entering the lobby behind her until the reflection shifted. A man in a dark hoodie approached with slow, deliberate steps. His face was mostly hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. Mara straightened, startled, but she forced herself to relax. It was a big building. 10 floors, 300 tenants. People came and went at all hours. Still, something about him, maybe the way he kept his head slightly down, made a cold ripple slide across her skin. He stepped inside without a word. "Evening," she whispered, though she wasn't sure why. Silence felt worse. He didn't respond, didn't even look at her. He just turned slightly, positioning himself between her and the elevator doors. Not threateningly, just oddly. The doors closed. The hum of the elevator motor filled the cramped space. Mara pulled out her phone, pretending to check messages, though her hands trembled faintly. She could feel him watching her even though he didn't lift his head. There was something unnervingly still about him, like every part of him was frozen except the slow rise and fall of his breath. The elevator jerked. A small shudder, barely noticeable, but enough to make Mara's heart quicken. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and tried to focus on the glowing floor numbers. 2, 3. "Long day?" she asked, hoping to fill the suffocating silence. He remained motionless. The elevator continued upward, the air growing heavier, thicker, as if the narrowing space was swallowing her voice. Mara swallowed hard and rested her eyes on the panel by the door. She noticed then that he wasn't pressing a button. He hadn't selected a floor at all. Maybe he lived on the same floor. Maybe he'd forgotten. Maybe 4, 5. Mara shifted away a fraction of an inch, almost unnoticeably. But he noticed. His head lifted, just slightly, just enough for her to see the lower half of his face. A tight jaw, a faint smirk, or maybe she imagined it. Her pulse thudded in her ears. 6. The security camera in the upper corner recorded everything. The way her posture stiffened, the way her fingers curled inward, the way her gaze flicked toward the emergency button, but didn't dare reach for it. 7. He finally turned his head toward her. Just a fraction. Just enough. The elevator dinged softly. The door slid open to a dim hallway Mara didn't recognize. Her breath caught. This wasn't her floor. The man stepped forward, and the camera captured the last clear frame of Mara D'Souza alive. Detective Elise Harlan paused the elevator footage for the 5th time, her jaw tightening as the final frame froze on the stranger's half-turned face and Mara's widening eyes. The glow of the monitor washed the dim security room in a cold, bluish haze. Behind her, the building manager hovered nervously, wringing his hands. "She never came out," he whispered, as if afraid the footage might hear him. No one saw her after this. Elise didn't respond immediately. She simply leaned closer, studying the timestamp. 11:42 p.m. She rewound 4 seconds, then 2, then 1. Each time, the same chilling stillness filled the screen, the stranger shifting just enough to block the camera's view of the elevator's interior as the doors slid shut. When she finally straightened, her spine felt stiff from hours of tension. "Where's her boyfriend?" she asked. "In the lobby. He's not doing well." That was an understatement. Rafik stood near the entrance, pacing in frantic circles. His eyes were wide with the raw sheen of fear that hadn't yet hardened into grief. The moment he saw Elise, he rushed toward her. "Please tell me you found her. Please. Tell me she got off on another floor." Elise shook her head slowly. "Not yet. We're checking every camera angle, every hallway feed. But nothing shows her leaving the building." Rafik's breath hitched. He pressed both hands to his hair, pulling slightly, as if trying to anchor himself. She wouldn't just disappear. "Mara always texts me when she gets home, even if she's exhausted. I called her. I called a dozen times." "Did she say anything earlier? Anything unusual?" Elisa's voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. He hesitated. That hesitation prickled the back of Elisa's neck like static. "She was tired," he finally said. "Stress from work. But nothing else. Nothing that would—" His voice broke. She should have walked through that door by now. Elise guided him toward a lobby chair. "We'll find her. But I need you clear-headed. When did you last speak to her?" "A little before 11. She texted she was locking up at the restaurant. She didn't mention anyone being around her. Did she ever say she felt followed lately?" Another flicker. Too quick, too faint, but Elise caught it. "No," he said, but the word came out thin, unconvincing. Before she could press further, 2 officers approached. "We completed the stairwell and rooftop search," the taller one reported. "Nothing. No sign of her clothing, her bag, anything." Elise gestured toward the basement. "Maintenance levels?" "We're checking now. It's a maze down there." Rafik turned sharply. "You're acting like she's not alive." Elise knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Right now, time is our enemy. So no one is assuming anything except that she needs to be found fast." Her calm steadiness seemed to ground him just enough to keep him from unraveling completely. The building lobby soon filled with quiet urgency, officers moving in pairs, radios crackling softly, neighbors emerging from doors half open with fear and curiosity. Some recognized Mara. Some didn't. All whispered variations of the same terrified question. How does someone vanish inside their own home? Elise watched the elevator doors open and close repeatedly as officers rode it up and down, retracing every possible path. She couldn't shake the uneasy truth forming inside her. Disappearances usually left traces. Footsteps, noise, a struggle, a door left ajar. But this was too clean, too silent. She returned to the security room, replaying the footage once more. Mara looked tired, yes, but alert. The stranger looked composed, unnervingly composed. And the way he stood, blocking, covering, controlling the frame without seeming to move. That wasn't coincidence. Someone who knew blind spots. Someone who'd done this before. Maybe not here, maybe not like this, but someone who understood the art of disappearing with another person. Her phone buzzed. The officer from the basement sounded breathless. "Detective, you need to come down here. We found something." Elise grabbed her coat and headed for the stairs, her heart thudding like a warning. She didn't know what waited below, but she was certain of one thing. The man in the hoodie wasn't a random stranger. The basement corridor smelled of damp concrete and old machinery as Detective Elise Harlan followed the officer's voice toward a narrow, poorly lit maintenance room. Pipes rattled overhead, carrying the restless hum of the building's hidden arteries. Her boot splashed through a shallow puddle, sending ripples across the dim hallway. The officer waited beside a metal door scratched with rust and years of neglect. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we found this wedge behind the water heater." He extended a gloved hand. Inside it, small, familiar, heartbreaking, was Mara's keychain. A silver charm shaped like a crescent moon dangled from it, still glinting under the fluorescent lights. Elisa's stomach sank. Any signs of forced entry? No, but someone was down here recently. Dust is disturbed, footprints leading deeper into the service tunnels. She stepped inside the cramped room, scanning the ground. 2 distinct sets of prints, One heavier, wider, and another smaller, marked the dusty floor. Her pulse sharpened. Mara had been here, and she hadn't been alone. Elise crouched beside the heater, running her light over the ground. Nothing else. No torn clothing, no blood, no notes. Just a cold imprint of a struggle that had left no sound behind. She stood, jaw tightening. Get forensics down here. Full sweep. I want everything processed. As officers scattered to relay her orders, Elise walked back toward the elevator, the keychain still weighing heavily on her thoughts. Mara had disappeared from a moving elevator. Her belongings were found in a restricted area she had no reason to enter, and the stranger, silent, looming, had guided the direction of it all. She returned to the security room, where a technician nodded at her. We tried enhancing the footage. You should see this. He played the clip. The elevator interior sharpened, pixel by pixel, resolving into clearer detail. Mara stood on the left, tense but trying to appear calm. The stranger beside her kept his head tilted down, but shadowing most of his features. But now some details emerged. The sharp angle of his jaw, the pale stubble, and the faint outline of a scar along his cheek. He's watching her through the reflection, the technician said. He pointed at the mirror behind Mara. See his eyes? Elise leaned closer. The man never lifted his head, but the mirror caught a sliver of his gaze. Dark, focused, unblinking. She exhaled slowly. He knew exactly what blind spots were. Yes, ma'am. He's careful. Almost practiced. The word settled heavily in the room. Practice, as if he had done this before. Elise rewound the clip again, studying the stranger's shoulder movement. Look at this, she murmured. There, see the shift? He's pressing something. The technician froze the frame. A faint indentation appeared near his sleeve. Elise narrowed her eyes. That's a remote, or a fob, something wireless, something that could manipulate the elevator system. You think he hijacked it? I think he bypassed it entirely. The elevator had gone to an unauthorized floor. The doors had opened to a dark hallway, and Mara had walked into that abyss with no chance to escape. Elise rubbed her thumb along her jawline. Run this image through every database. I don't care how long it takes. I need a face match, even a partial. The technician nodded and began the process. Behind her, the elevator dinged. Rafik stood there, eyes red, face pale. Did you find something? His voice quivered between hope and dread. Elise hesitated. She didn't want to break him further, but she also couldn't lie. We found her keychain in the basement. Rafik's breath caught. So she was alive after the elevator? Possibly. He leaned against the wall, covering his face with his hands. She watched him carefully. Every micro-expression, every flinch, every tremor. Something about him felt tightly wound, like he was struggling to hold back more than grief. Quietly, she asked, Look at him again. The man in the hoodie. Are you sure you've never seen him? Rafik stared at the screen. His pupils constricted. His throat bobbed. He stepped back. I don't know him, he whispered, too quickly. But Elise saw the truth flicker in his eyes. Recognition. Before she could press further, the technician spoke urgently. Detective, we got something. The scar on his cheek. There's a partial match. It's not exact, but close enough to flag. Elise stepped forward as the name appeared on screen. Jerome Kane. Her pulse spiked. Rafik froze. And Elise suddenly understood that this case was about more than a stranger in a hoodie. It was personal. Rafik stared at the name glowing on the monitor, Jerome Kane, as if it were a ghost he'd spent years trying to bury. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Elise studied him closely, watching the panic bloom beneath the surface, like a bruise spreading slow and dark. You've heard of him, Elise said quietly. Rafik shook his head too fast. No, the name surprised me. But Elise didn't look away. The footage doesn't lie. And your reaction just told me more than your words ever will. Rafik clenched his jaw, shoulders tightening as though bracing against an invisible storm. I told you I don't know him. Before Elise could challenge him, her phone buzzed. The forensics unit had finished sweeping the basement. She stepped aside to take the call. Detective Harland, she answered. a gruff voice responded. "We found trace fibers near the maintenance tunnel, dark cotton, likely from a hoodie. Size suggests a man with broad shoulders. And something else." Elise felt the shift in the air. "Go on." "A partial fingerprint. Not enough for a full ID, but enough to confirm deliberate handling of door mechanisms. Someone opened the service hatch from the inside. Inside, someone familiar enough with the building to navigate its unseen pathways." When she hung up, Rafik was rubbing his temples, as if battling a headache that refused to loosen its grip. Elise walked back toward him. "You're sweating," she observed. "It's been a long night," he replied, but his voice trembled. "Longer from Mara," she said. That silenced him completely. Elise gestured toward the hallway. "Walk with me." He hesitated, but followed. The corridor outside the security room felt colder than before, its fluorescent lights flickering with a nervous hum. Elise stopped near a small alcove and crossed her arms. "Tell me about your relationship with Mara." Rafik swallowed. "We were fine." That's not what her co-worker said. He stiffened. "What co-worker?" "The one who mentioned your arguments. The late-night fights. The nights Mara slept at her sister's place because she felt suffocated." Rafik's eyes widened. "She told you that?" "She didn't have to. People talk. And so far, you've avoided every question that might put you under a brighter light." Anger flickered across his face. "You think I hurt her? That I'd—" "No," Elise said calmly. "I think you're hiding something. And whatever it is, it's connected to Jerome Kane." Rafik looked away, jaw trembling, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles whitened. For a moment, Elise thought he would finally crack. But instead, he exhaled shakily and whispered, "I just want her back." Elise let the silence stretch, hoping it would nudge him toward honesty. But he said nothing more. "Not yet." She turned and walked toward the elevator. "I'll ask you again later," she said softly. "And eventually you will tell me the truth." As the elevator doors closed, Rafik stood frozen in the hallway, haunted, conflicted, afraid. Elise couldn't shake the feeling that his fear wasn't solely about losing Mara. It was about something catching up with him. Upstairs, Elise interviewed residents one by one. Most knew nothing. But one detail kept resurfacing. A hooded man seen lingering around the building during the past week. Sometimes near the mail area. Sometimes near the stairs. Always silent. Always watching. A retired schoolteacher recalled seeing him by the dumpsters 2 nights earlier. "He didn't belong here," she whispered. "He looked lost but dangerous, like someone waiting for a reason to break." Another tenant mentioned seeing Mara in tears a week ago, arguing softly on the phone, repeating the same phrase. "I can't do this anymore." Elise replayed that line in her head as she returned to the lobby. Every witness painted the same picture. Mara wasn't just tired. She was scared, hiding something, torn between loyalty and dread. As Elise stepped outside for air, the city's chilled wind brushed against her face. She stared at the building's facade, imagining Mara's last steps. A secret visitor, tension at home, a man from the shadows, and a missing woman caught in the crossfire. Her phone buzzed again, this time with the medical examiner's preliminary analysis on the hollowed footprint impressions in the basement. The message was short. Height estimate, 6 feet 1 inch. Weight approximate 190 pounds. Matches Jerome Kane's profile. Elise's stomach tightened. Jerome Kane wasn't just a name from a file. He was here, and from the way Rafik reacted, he wasn't a stranger. Elise exhaled sharply, her breath fogging the cold air as a thought crystallized. Whatever Mara had been hiding wasn't just dangerous. It was personal. Detective Elise Harlan didn't return to the precinct right away. Instead, she sat in her parked car across from the apartment building, watching the windows flicker with scattered lights. The city buzzed around her, horns, distant music, footsteps on wet pavement, but all she heard was the echo of Mara's co-worker's voice. She said she couldn't do this anymore. Whatever this was, it had a name now. Jerome Kane. Elise opened her laptop, pulling up the preliminary file associated with him. The information was thin, too thin for a man whose presence clearly terrified Rafik. A few juvenile records. 2 sealed cases, a dismissed assault charge from years ago, and then nothing. Men like that didn't just vanish from paper unless someone wanted them invisible. She scrolled further and stopped. A note tucked into the bottom corner. Associated individual, Mara D'Souza. Incident date, 8 years prior. Classification, sealed. Elise's heart tightened. Mara knew him. The file didn't elaborate, just a redacted block of text blacked out like a wound stitched shut. But even that absence told Elise everything. Mara and Jerome Kane shared a past carefully buried beneath legal ink. She slammed the laptop shut. This wasn't a random encounter. This wasn't coincidence. This was history resurfacing and dragging Mara under with it. Back inside the building, Elise found Rafik sitting alone in the dim lobby. His elbows rested on his knees, hands clasped together, head hanging low. He looked like a man drowning in secrets, the weight of them pulling him deeper by the hour. "Rafik," she said gently. He didn't look up. "Did you find anything else?" "Not yet, but I found something you need to explain." That made him flinch. Slowly, he raised his eyes to meet hers. Elise pulled a chair beside him. "Why didn't you tell me Mara knew Jerome Kane?" His face went blank, too quickly, too deliberately. "What?" She didn't. "I accessed a sealed archive." Elise kept her voice calm, but firm. "There's a record linking them from 8 years ago. You knew something. You still know something." Rafik swallowed hard, throat bobbing with suppressed tremor. Mara never mentioned his name. Not once. "That may be true," Elise said, "but your reaction earlier wasn't confusion. It was recognition." He exhaled sharply and covered his face with both hands. For a moment, Elise thought he might break open completely. But then he let out a ragged breath and spoke quietly. "I didn't know his name," he whispered, "but I knew something was wrong. Someone was bothering her, calling from block numbers, leaving notes on her windshield." Elise's pulse sharpened. "Why didn't you report it?" "She said it would make things worse." His voice cracked. "She said this person wouldn't stop unless she disappeared." Elise leaned forward. "Rafik, listen to me carefully. What did she tell you about her past?" He closed his eyes as though forcing himself back into memories he'd spent years avoiding. "When we first started dating," he murmured, "she told me she'd been with someone before. Someone dangerous. Someone who wouldn't let go. She didn't say his name. She didn't describe him. She only said he ruined parts of her life she could never get back." Elise's breath hitched. Did she ever say he hurt her? A long silence. Then, barely audible, "Yes." Elise closed her eyes briefly. That was it. The missing link. The forbidden connection binding Mara and Jerome Kane, from a past violent enough to leave sealed records in its wake. When she opened her eyes again, Rafik looked at her with something between helplessness and terror. "Do you think he came back for her?" "I think he never really left," Elise replied. She stood, alert now, every detective instinct firing. "I need you to tell me everything. Every strange call. Every moment she seemed afraid. Every time she tried to protect you from something." Rafik nodded numbly. "There's more. A lot more." Elise's pulse quickened. This was the crack she'd been waiting for. The truth was finally bleeding through the surface. But before she could question him further, the building's entrance door buzzed loudly. Both of them turned. A security guard stepped inside, holding a thin envelope. His expression was unsettled. "This was found taped to the back in trance," he said. "No name. No sender." Elise took the envelope carefully. It was unmarked, damp from the cold and thin, containing only a single folded page. She opened it. 3 words stared back at her in bold, uneven writing. "She belongs to me." Rafik's face drained the color. Elise's heartbeat thundered. The forbidden connection wasn't just past tense. It was alive, present, hunting. Mara's apartment looked exactly the same as the night she vanished. Neat, quiet, curated with soft colors and small touches that suggested a woman who tried very hard to appear calm on the outside. Detective Rourke stepped inside slowly, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The transition from the interrogation room's harsh fluorescent light to this muted living space was jarring, but he needed that contrast. It reminded him how easily a life could split in two, what the world sees and what it never suspects. He moved deeper into the space, scanning framed photographs on the wall. Mara smiling with co-workers. Mara hiking. Mara at a birthday party. Perfectly normal moments, but something about them felt curated, as if she had chosen specifically which parts of herself she allowed others to witness. It struck him as too clean, too controlled. Her mother's voice echoed in his mind. Mara never talked about her problems. She didn't want to burden anyone. She just kept everything to herself. That kind of silence was a red flag. He opened her desk drawer, not rummaging, but searching with intention. Inside were receipts, organized envelopes, a planner filled with neat handwriting. But tucked beneath a stack of utility bills was a small, leather-bound notebook. No title, no decoration. Just hidden. Rourke's pulse kicked. He sat down, opened it, and immediately felt the temperature of the room drop. Pages filled with words she never showed the world. Short, frantic entries written at night, each one unveiling a piece of the truth she had swallowed alone. Someone keeps following me. I thought it was stress at first, but now I'm sure. Same hoodie, same footsteps, same elevator. Rourke exhaled slowly, turning the page. More entries. He waits. I can feel him watching. I told Liam, but he said I was overthinking again. No one listens when you've been anxious your whole life. The mention of Liam tightened something in Rourke's chest. Her boyfriend claimed she was stable, happy, but these pages said otherwise. She had been scared, deeply, silently scared, and nobody knew. Her fear was real, growing, and closing around her long before the elevator doors slid shut the night she vanished. One entry in particular stopped him cold. I know who he is. I shouldn't, but I followed him once. If anything happens to me, it won't be random. Rourke leaned back in his chair. Mara had followed the man in the hoodie, the same man who entered the elevator with her. That wasn't fear, that was desperation. People didn't chase their nightmares unless they were trying to reclaim control. But the next entry was worse. Liam can't know. He'll think this is one more episode. But this isn't. This is real. He knows where I live. The detective felt a protective anger simmer beneath his ribs. The woman everyone described as gentle, soft-spoken, responsible, she had been fighting a private war. And the more he read, the more he understood that Mara had protected everyone else from the truth, even when she should have protected herself instead. He flipped to the final page she had written on. Only one sentence filled the space, written in a shaky, uneven hand. He talked to me today. Rourke froze. The date of that entry? 24 hours before she disappeared. He closed the notebook carefully, as if any sudden movement might disturb the lingering ghost of her fear. Then his eyes drifted to the apartment door, the same door she must have locked, double-checked, and still not felt safe behind. Someone had gotten close enough to speak to her. Someone she knew, or someone who had been waiting long enough to no longer need to hide. Rourke slipped the notebook into an evidence bag and stood, his expression tightening with purpose. Whatever Mara hid from everyone, it wasn't hidden anymore. And the next person he needed to talk to knew far more than he'd admitted. Liam. The truth was starting to surface. It was darker than anyone expected. Detective Rourke replayed the elevator footage again as he drove toward Liam's workplace, the city lights streaking across his windshield like blurred memories. Mara's final journal entry still echoed in his mind. He talked to me today. Whoever that man in the hoodie was, he hadn't just appeared randomly the night she vanished. He had been circling her life long before the elevator doors sealed shut. Rourke tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Mara had recognized him. She had followed him, and she had been afraid enough to write those words in a trembling hand. That meant the elevator wasn't merely the last place she was seen. It was the perfect location for a planned encounter. A trap. The footage confirmed as much. Mara stepped inside first, her posture tense but trying to appear normal. Moments later, the hooded man entered. He didn't rush. He didn't seem nervous. His movements were calm, almost casual, like someone who already knew how the next few minutes would unfold. Rourke pulled up in front of the building where the elevator was located and stepped out into the cold night. The structure loomed above him, glass, steel, and anonymity. Thousands of people move through it every day. No one would have noticed two people entering an elevator together. Inside, the lobby was quiet. A security guard glanced up, but didn't stop him. The detective's badge was enough. Rourke moved toward the bank of elevators, the same ones Mara had used. The air felt unsettlingly still. He pressed a button. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, its silver doors sliding open like the parted lips of something waiting to swallow him. The interior looked ordinary. Too ordinary. But Rourke had spent years reading rooms the way others read books. Ordinary was never ordinary. He stepped inside slowly, letting the doors close behind him. The faint hum of machinery surrounded him as he pressed the button for the 15th floor. The elevator began to rise, the movement gentle but steady. He could almost picture Mara standing exactly where he was standing now, anxious, cornered, trying to breathe quietly while the man in the hoodie stood just inches away. He imagined their silence, the kind that crushes rather than comforts. The detective leaned forward, examining the corner of a ceiling. A camera pointed downward, capturing everything, but the angle was slightly off. Someone had tilted it. That meant someone didn't want everything recorded. Deliberate, calculated. Close. He remembered how the hooded man had positioned himself in the footage. Not threateningly, not overtly predatory, but strategically blocking the buttons, standing between Mara and any attempt to leave. The kind of stance you only took when you plan on keeping someone exactly where they were. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor. Rourke stepped out, scanning the hallway. He knew the layout already. He had studied it earlier, but being here in person made the details sharper, heavier. The hallway was long, dimly lit, with soft gray carpeting absorbing sound. Doors lined both sides, belonging to small companies and freelance workspaces. It was the perfect place for someone to disappear quietly. Rourke crouched near the corner, where the camera should have captured everything. But the lighting created a blind spot, a narrow strip where two figures could stand unseen. His jaw tightened. That blind spot hadn't always been there. Someone had manipulated the lighting. Someone who knew the building. Someone who understood security patterns. And then something else caught his eye. A small scuff mark near the baseboard, barely visible unless you were looking. Not dirt, not normal wear. A drag mark, as if something or someone had been pulled along the floor. Rourke's pulse sharpened. He pulled out his flashlight, angling the beam across the carpet fibers. The trail extended only 2 feet before disappearing completely, as if the carpet had been replaced or cleaned intentionally. A cover-up. Someone had been here after the footage ended. Someone had cleaned up whatever happened next. The silence around him deepened, pressing it on him like a held breath. He could almost hear Mara's last steps echoing faintly through the hallway, swallowed by a trap she never truly escaped. Rourke stood slowly, tension gathering in his shoulders. If the elevator was a trap, then this floor was a destination. Planned, premeditated, and concealed with precision. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. And now, Rourke needed answers from the one person who might have known Mara better than anyone. Liam. The detective turned, heading back toward the elevator, the truth starting to close in like the walls of a narrowing corridor. Detective Elise Harlan stared at Jerome Kane's record, the numbers and letters blurring as her mind traced patterns beyond the paperwork. Each entry told the story of a man capable of meticulous planning, but the gaps in the record whispered of secrets deliberately erased. Juvenile offenses vanished behind sealed cases, old arrests dismissed under mysterious circumstances. The paper trail ended neatly, but she knew from experience. Neat endings were rarely real in cases like this. Jerome's presence in Mara's life had not been sudden. It had been deliberate, slow, calculated. Every small step, hovering in the lobby, the hoodie, the elevator, was part of a pattern, a web, a spider waiting. Elise leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The thought of the man, quiet, still, poised to trap someone like Mara, made her skin crawl. Her phone buzzed. It was the technician who had been analyzing the elevator footage. Detective, we traced a partial fingerprint on the elevator's control panel. Jerome Kane. Confirmed match. Elise exhaled sharply. As expected, she muttered, her mind already circling back to Mara's journal entries. He talked to me today. Jerome hadn't been following by chance. He had been orchestrating, communicating in subtle, silent ways, ensuring Mara was aware, anxious, under his gaze without anyone noticing. She ran a hand over her face. Jerome's life had been steeped in instability. A broken home, abandonment, petty thefts, minor assaults had escalated with age. His past was a tangled, jagged path of trauma and obsession. But obsession wasn't just a symptom. It was intentional. He had learned early that control could be exerted quietly, methodically, leaving victims wondering if it was their own fault. Elise studied the mugshot again. The pale stubble, the faint scar, the hard set of his jaw. And his eyes, cold, calculating, yet not completely devoid of pain. There was a story there, a darkness nurtured over years, culminating in the silent, meticulous hunt. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Rafik, desperate. Detective, do you think he knows we're onto him? Yes, Elise said, voice steady but tight. And if we delay, Mara may not have another chance. She ended the call and focused on the web he had spun. Jerome wasn't reckless. He had orchestrated every movement with precision. The elevator, the blind spots, the basement, the maintenance tunnels. He knew the building intimately. He had watched Mara long enough to anticipate her reactions, to predict her fear. She hadn't just walked into a stranger. She had walked into someone who understood her, who could manipulate her, who could trap her in a way that left no evidence. The more Elise traced the web, the more she realized Jerome's life had been shaped by secrecy and deception. His relationships were either one-sided or exploitative. Friends, acquaintances, anyone who had glimpsed the darkness inside him, most disappeared from his life quietly, leaving little trace. He had honed the art of lying so thoroughly that even those closest to him would question their own memories. But one pattern emerged clearly. Jerome fixated on Mara not merely as a target, but as a vessel for revenge, control, and validation. She represented the culmination of his obsession, a way to assert dominance over a world he had spent years perceiving as hostile. Elise knew this wasn't just about Mara's disappearance anymore. This was about unmasking a man who had spent years cultivating a life built entirely on manipulation, who had perfected the art of concealment, and who now held Mara at the center of his carefully engineered chaos. Her phone buzzed again, a message from the elevator technician. We found something else. Camera angles in the lobby from earlier this week showed Jerome watching Mara from the stairwell. Consistent pattern. Premeditated. Elise's stomach tightened. It wasn't just stalking. It wasn't just obsession. It was a plan executed with chilling patience. She rose from her chair, pacing the room. Jerome's web wasn't merely physical. It was psychological, crafted over years to ensnare Mara and isolate her from any help. And every move he had made since she disappeared fit neatly into that web. The detective knew the next step was clear. She had to confront the web directly, to trace the threads and uncover the truth behind the man orchestrating it. And in doing so, she would see just how deep the darkness surrounding Mara really went. Jerome Kane was no longer just a suspect. He was the architect of a nightmare. And Chapter 9 would reveal the first tangible evidence of what he'd been hiding all along. Detective Elise Harlan stood at the top of the narrow stairwell, leading to the building's forgotten service floor. Her flashlight pierced the shadows, illuminating the dusty steps and flaking paint. This area wasn't on any modern blueprints. Tenants never went here, and security cameras didn't cover it. But it was precisely what made her gut tighten. Somewhere Jerome Kane could operate unseen, a place Mara could have been trapped. She descended slowly, each step creaking under her weight. The air smelled of mildew and metal, the kind of sterile damp that sank into your lungs and made every breath feel heavier. Dust motes danced in her flashlight's beam, tiny particles suspended like ghosts of the past. She reached the landing, a narrow corridor lined with unmarked doors, some warped from years of neglect. The walls bore scratches, fingerprints long since covered with layers of paint, a silent testimony of past trespassers. One door, smaller and nondescript, caught her attention immediately. Unlike the others, It had a slight gap at the bottom and a faint metallic scuff, as if it had been recently opened or closed. Elise crouched, inspecting the floor. Footprints, smudged partial but fresh, led to the door. Her pulse quickened. This was the first tangible sign that someone had been here. Moving carefully to avoid cameras. Every instinct screamed at her. Jerome had orchestrated this space, knowing no one would check it. Mara hadn't vanished by accident. She had been guided, manipulated, trapped in plain sight. She drew her flashlight closer to the door handle. Cold metal, smooth, and unlatched. Slowly, she pushed it open. The room was small, roughly 8 by 10 feet, and entirely windowless. Dust covered every surface except for a single object in the center, a foldable cot with a thin, rumpled blanket. Her heart clenched at the sight. Mara's shoes, neatly placed under the cot, confirmed what her instincts had already whispered. She had been here, alive, and Jerome had made this space a prison. Elise scanned the rest of the room. Sparse, controlled, minimalistic, no distractions, no object to call attention. But every detail screamed calculated intent. A small trash bin, a stack of magazines with pages dog-eared and folded, a single locked cabinet bolted to the wall. The cabinet seemed inconspicuous, yet Elise knew better. Jerome didn't leave things to chance. Whatever he wanted to hide, evidence, weapons, or notes, it was in there. A faint rustle caught her attention. She froze, flashlight sweeping across the cot. Nothing moved, only shadows, elongated and twisting across the walls. Her stomach tightened. This room had been used recently. Someone had been here. Someone who knew exactly how to manipulate the environment to ensure isolation and fear. Jerome Kane's signature. She crouched to inspect the cot. Slight indentations, consistent with someone sleeping or sitting for extended periods. Every crease and fold suggested Mara had tried to make herself small, to disappear even within this confined space. The thought made Elise's jaw tighten. She had to get Mara out before Jerome returned. Her hand drifted to the locked cabinet. Picking the lock would take time, but she had learned patience. She couldn't rush. Every wrong move here could alert Jerome, and if he returned, Mara's life could be at risk. Elise glanced back at the corridor. The faint hum of the building's machinery seemed to echo Jerome's presence, invisible yet omnipresent. She ran through the steps needed to secure the room, extract Mara, and maintain control of the perimeter. Every scenario played through her mind, every contingency accounted for. Before she could act, a faint sound, soft, deliberate footsteps, drifted down the corridor. Her breath hitched. The timing, the silence, the way it echoed against the walls. Jerome had returned, or someone he trusted. Elise froze. She had found the room no one checked. But finding Mara before he noticed was a race she couldn't afford to lose. The detective gripped her flashlight and prepared to move forward. Every second counted. And Chapter 10 would reveal what Jerome had been hiding here all along, and the shocking truth about Mara's fate. Detective Elise Harlan leaned against the edge of Mara's abandoned cot, the thin blanket still faintly warm, evidence of recent occupancy. Every muscle in her body tensed. The corridors beyond the small, windowless room were silent, but she could almost feel Jerome Kane's presence lingering like a shadow. Every instinct told her she wasn't alone. And yet, the confession she was about to hear would come from someone entirely unexpected. Liam sat opposite her, shoulders slumped, hands trembling as he held his own phone like a lifeline. Elise had brought him here after careful questioning, after uncovering Mara's hidden journal, after tracing Jerome's movements. He knew more than he had admitted. He always had. And now, pressed between fear and guilt, the weight of the truth was breaking him. I didn't want her to get hurt, Liam whispered, voice cracking. I thought I could handle him. I thought I could scare him off. But it got worse. Elise's eyes narrowed. Handle who, Liam? Jerome Kane. The name hung heavy between them, sharp as a knife. Liam's hand shook more violently now. He swallowed and tried to speak, but the words came out jagged, disjointed. It was me. I called her that night from a block number. I watched. I didn't think she'd get scared. I wanted to protect her from him. But I thought if I controlled it, he couldn't hurt her. Elise's stomach twisted. The pieces were forming a horrifying puzzle. Liam had tried to manage Jerome, to predict him, to intervene in ways that only escalated the danger. Mara had been caught in the middle, unaware of how her closest ally had inadvertently strengthened her tormentor's grip. You mean you lure him closer? Elise's voice was soft but sharp, cutting through the tension. All this time, you were trying to protect her, and it backfired. Liam nodded, the motion trembling. I didn't know what else to do. She never trusted anyone. She never told anyone about him. And I thought, if I could see him first, maybe I could control it. Elise shook her head slowly. The confession was a blade, slicing through everything she believed. Mara hadn't walked into the elevator with a stranger by chance. She hadn't merely vanished due to bad luck. The trap had been set long before that night, and Liam, in his fear and love, had become an unintentional architect of her isolation. She thought she could handle him herself, Liam continued, voice barely above a whisper. She said it would be easier if I didn't know. I didn't listen. I made it worse. Elise's pulse quickened. Every second counted. The labyrinth of lies, half-truths, and secrecy had led to this moment. Liam's confession was the missing link, explaining why Jerome had been able to operate with such precision, why Mara had disappeared without a trace, why every warning she had written in her journal had gone unheeded. You have to tell me everything, Elise said firmly, voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Every call, every encounter, every piece of information you withheld. If we're going to save her, we need the full picture. Liam nodded, swallowing hard. He began recounting every detail. The block numbers, the hidden messages, the cryptic warnings Mara had received, and the brief sightings of Jerome that he had attempted to manage, all in vain. With each confession, the web of deceit unraveled, revealing the horrifying truth. Mara had been silenced not only by Jerome's obsession, but also by the very person she trusted most to protect her. Elise listened intently, committing every word to memory. This confession didn't just clarify events. It changed the stakes. Jerome wasn't merely a dangerous stalker. He had been anticipated, manipulated, and unintentionally enabled. Mara's life had depended on trust, and trust had fractured long before the elevator ride. As Liam's voice grew weaker with exhaustion, Elise rose, gripping her flashlight. "We have what we need to move forward," she said. Her eyes scanned the room once more. Mara had hidden more than her fear. She had hidden the depth of her vulnerability, the danger she sensed, and the identity of the person who complicated it all. The next step was clear. Confront Jerome Kane, trace the threads of the web he had spun, and finally unravel the nightmare. Detective Elise Harlan sat in the dim security office, the glow of multiple monitors casting pale shadows across her face. For weeks, she had pored over the elevator footage, every angle meticulously enhanced, every frame examined. She knew the sequence by heart. The doors closing, Mara's tentative steps, the hooded figure's deliberate positioning. But something gnawed at her, something the cameras had failed to capture. She replayed the sequence yet again. The footage showed the elevator's interior, the precise timing, the mirror reflections. But it didn't show the tiny hesitation in Mara's movements as she reached for buttons, the microsecond flicker of recognition when she glimpsed the man's eyes in the mirrored ceiling. Those were details too small for the lens to record, but massive in psychological impact. Elise exhaled, pressing her fingers to her temples. The footage had been crucial, yes, but it had been incomplete. It had captured the mechanics of the crime, the precise movements and timings, but it had not captured the fear, the silent calculation, the anticipation, human elements that no camera could fully render. She leaned back, running to the timeline in her head. Mara had known Jerome was dangerous. She had sensed it long before the elevator ride. Every choice she made, every moment of hesitation, was shaped by the invisible threads he had woven around her life. And every detail not captured on tape, the whispered phone calls, the furtive glances, the barely perceptible shift in his posture, was part of the story that video alone could never tell. Elise turned to Rafik, who sat beside her, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "The footage shows what happened," she said softly, "but it doesn't show why. It doesn't show how Mara felt in those final moments, or how Jerome manipulated everything around her." Rafik swallowed hard. It makes sense now," he whispered. "All those times I thought she was overreacting, she was scared. She knew something we couldn't see." Elise nodded. "Exactly. The cameras don't capture intuition, fear, or instinct. They only capture movement. But the silence between the movements, that's where the truth hides." Her eyes drifted back to the screens. The elevator scene repeated in an endless loop. Mara on the left, Jerome's shadowed figure on the right. The reflection in the mirror betrayed his presence, but the video alone didn't convey the tension, the subtle shift in Mara's stance, or the fleeting second she realized she had no escape. Elise pulled up Mara's journal on the nearby laptop, aligning entries with the elevator footage. She compared the timestamps, the descriptions, the tiny moments Mara had documented. The shiver when the stranger approached, the cautious glance toward the buttons, the brief clench of her fists. Every note added dimension to what the footage omitted. The detective felt a growing sense of urgency. Jerome's manipulations extended far beyond what anyone had seen. He had orchestrated the environment, controlled the timing, and anticipated reactions. The video had shown the outcome, but it had not revealed the meticulous planning, the psychological pressure, or the fear that had guided Mara's every move. Elisa's hand hovered over her phone. She needed to trace Jerome's digital footprints, his hidden communications, every unseen decision that had led Mara to that elevator. The footage had been a window, but now she had to step into the spaces between the frames, the silences, the shadows, the unrecorded steps. Rafik's voice broke the heavy silence. "Do you think she knew she could survive?" Elise shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but she fought every step. And that fight, that determination, it's what will help us find her now. We've seen what the footage shows. Now we have to uncover what it doesn't." The monitors continued their endless loop, shadows flickering, movements repeating. But Elisa's focus was elsewhere. She had to reconstruct every unrecorded moment, every hidden action, every subtle clue Jerome thought he had erased. Because in the spaces the cameras missed, the truth waited. Detective Elise Harlan moved silently through the basement corridors, flashlight in hand, the faint hum of the building's old machinery echoing off the concrete walls. Every creak of a pipe and flicker of shadow tightened the knot in her stomach. This was the final stretch, the place where Jerome Kane had hidden Mara, the web of lies finally converging into a single, terrifying truth. Her team had cleared the perimeter, but Elise knew better than to assume safety. Jerome was a man who thrived in shadows, who calculated every step, anticipated every move. He would not be caught unprepared. And yet, she pressed forward, each step deliberate, aware that Mara's life balanced on her decisions. The faint smell of dust and cold metal guided her toward the smallest, most nondescript door in the corner, the room no one checked. Elise's breath hitched as she approached it, recalling the footprints, the scuff marks, and the cot. She remembered Mara's shoes neatly tucked beneath it, the thin blanket still rumpled as if someone had been resting there only moments ago. Elisa's hand rested on the doorknob. She paused, listening. Silence. Nothing. And yet she could feel it. Jerome's presence, even if he was miles away, a shadow of menace lingering in the walls themselves. She motioned for her backup to hold position and stepped inside alone, every sense heightened. The room was as she remembered, small, windowless, sterile. The cot remained in the center, untouched since the last search. Elise crouched, scanning the floor and corners, flashlight sweeping methodically. And then she heard it, a faint shuffle from behind the cabinet bolted to the wall. Her pulse spiked. "Mara," she called softly. The response was a whisper, hoarse but alive. "Detective, over here." Elise rushed to the cabinet, unlocking it quickly. Mara emerged, disheveled, pale, but breathing. Her eyes were wide, filled with relief and fear, and they clung to Elise as though she were the only anchor in the world. "It's okay, Mara," Elise said gently. "You're safe now. We've got you." The moment was brief. The real challenge remained Jerome Kane. Elise's radio crackled, and she heard the officers reporting a figure attempting to flee through the service corridors. Jerome had underestimated her team's coordination. He had counted on shadows to protect him. But justice didn't wait for the perfect darkness. It hunted even there. Elise moved swiftly, flashlight cutting through the gloom as she pursued him. Jerome ran with the same calculated precision he had used to stalk Mara, but he had left enough traces behind, scuff marks, displaced debris, faint sounds, to guide the detective. Her mind replayed the web of manipulation he had spun, the psychological torment inflicted on Mara, and the lives left in shadow. She caught up at the stairwell. Jerome turned abruptly, had falling back, revealing a face that was cold, sharp, but fraying at the edges. His eyes darted, searching for escape. "It ends tonight, Jerome," Elise said firmly, gun drawn but steady. "No more games." He sneered, a flicker of defiance. "You think you've won? You don't understand. She's mine." Elise's stomach tightened, but she didn't waver. "No one owns anyone. Not you. Not your obsession. You've terrorized her long enough." Jerome hesitated. That moment of doubt was enough. Officers moved in, pinning him securely. He struggled, hissed, and cursed, but the darkness he had relied upon was no longer his ally. Elise watched, calm and resolute, as the man who had haunted Mara's life for years was finally restrained. She turned back to Mara, who trembled but allowed herself to be guided out of the cabinet and into the corridor. The first light of dawn filtered faintly through the upper windows, washing the walls in muted gold. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Mara breathed freely. Elise felt the weight of the investigation lift slightly, but knew the psychological scars would linger. Jerome's capture did not erase fear, but it ended the immediate threat. Justice had arrived in the dark, not as vengeance, but as truth enforced and lives restored. Later, as Mara was reunited with Rafik and medical personnel checked her condition, Elise stood outside the building, the early morning chill brushing her face. Jerome was taken into custody, the evidence cataloged, the confession recorded, the web unraveled. Every detail they had painstakingly uncovered had led to this moment. Elise reflected on the story of shadows and secrecy, on the footage that hadn't told the full truth, on the confessions that had broken everything wide open. Mara had survived, not because the darkness had failed, but because someone had refused to let it remain unchecked. And in that silence, Elise Harlan understood a fundamental truth of her work. Justice rarely arrives in light alone. Sometimes it moves quietly through shadows, through hidden corridors, through the spaces between fear and courage. And when it does, it brings not only closure, but the chance to breathe again. Mara, safe for now, clung to that truth. And Elise, finally stepping into morning sun, knew the darkness had been met with resolve and that the nightmare had ended.